Picture this. It's late at night, and you're just at the edge of sleep when you hear a knocking at the door. Looking at the clock, you see it's 2 a.m. Concerned at who it might be at this hour, you quickly but silently go to the front door. Just before you're about to ask who's there, you hear a voice of a child. "I need to call my mom. Can you let me in?" Your protective instincts kick in, and you reach for the door handle, and then a sudden dread hits you. You peek through the peephole, and there you see two children, maybe 6 and 10. Your entire body is screaming not to open the door. Just then, one of the children looks up at the peephole, and you see their eyes, the eyes of a shark, a predator, a demon. Welcome to Arcane Station. I'm your host, Mike Porter, and tonight we're going to do a deep dive on the Black-Eyed Kids. We'll cover the reports that started in the 1990s, but discuss how history tells us that these creatures may have been here much longer than we imagined. We'll go over theories about what they are, where they're from, and what explanations there are, and ultimately what I think they are and why. We have a great deal to cover in a very short period of time, so let's get going on this episode of the Black-Eyed Kids. The initial story comes to us from Brian Bethel, a journalist in Abilene, Texas, where his report of his encounter filled the early internet and message boards with one of its first creepypasta type stories. In 1996, Brian was pulled in front of a movie theater and was using the light from the marquee to fill out a check that he intended to drop off. As he was looking down at the check, he heard a rapping at the window. He assumed it was a police officer seeing if he was okay, but what it turned into was two young boys standing next to his car. Brian rolled down his window slightly, asking the boys what they wanted and if they were okay. The older boy, about 12, with an olive complexion and curly dark hair, said, "We need a ride home to get money from my mom so we can watch Mortal Kombat." Brian sat there for a moment confused, and the boy stated, "Come on, we're just kids, we won't hurt you," and finally stating, "We don't have a gun." That last sentence unnerved Brian as he sat there, a little perplexed. Looking at the marquee, clearly the movie they wanted to see was almost over. Brian looked back at the kid to say as much when he noticed the kids staring at him, both of the kids. And their eyes were soulless and black. Brian, shocked, he stammered and excused himself while slowly backing his car away from the boys. The older boy started following the car, banging on the window. "Let us in, mister. We can't come in unless you let us." As Brian began to speed away, he looked back in his rearview mirror and the boys were gone, with no obstructions for them to hide behind. They were just gone. So now that we have a first account that brought the phenomenon to light, let's talk about historical and folkloric parallels to help us understand where these types of creatures may come from. In Norse and Celtic folklore, there's this concept of a changeling, a creature that is put in place of a stolen baby, as a decoy or intruder into a family. Usually implanted by fairies or trolls, they would appear as children, but then, over time, their behaviors would become odd. Their skin pale, and their eyes would change. This idea of a changeling has been examined in movies. For instance, in 2019, The Hole in the Ground. There are others as well. The Hollow Child, and even A Christmas Horror Story have such themes, of these children being stolen by fae folk and returned as something else. And there are a multitude of these films, and the idea around a child being replaced with something unnatural is a good premise for scaring people. Imagining this happening in real life is terrifying. So some skeptics state that these Norse and Celtic mythologies were a way to explain afflictions such as autism, cerebral palsy, or even developmental disorders. However, I believe many of these modern afflictions weren't a concern, or at least as big of a concern, in those times. Whatever the case, the developmental disorders don't explain everything away. Where does this need to be let in come from? If these creatures are changelings, there has to be a precursor for that interaction dynamic. This is where we turn to descriptions of vampires and their behavior. In vampiric lore, these creatures require consent to enter into your house. Oftentimes they appear pale, they have dark or black eyes, and they ask for permission. The first time this was written about was by Sheridan Le Fanu in his 1872 novel, Carmilla. and then by Bram Stoker in 1897 in his novel Dracula. However, much older folklore and myths speak of the same need for permission. In Eastern European folklore, earlier tales of revenants and spirits sometimes included them scratching at doors or windows, attempting to be let back into their former homes. There's also older European threshold myths. The idea that a home's doorway is a sacred boundary that protects against evil spirits has long existed in European folklore. And then there's other creatures. Before Stoker, the invitation role was more broadly associated with many types of supernatural beings, such as demons, ghosts, and fairies. What other places do we see the requirements of permission for interaction, and how does that fit into the story? We now turn to biblical passages. Evil requires permission in a variety of ways. In the Bible, evil's ability to act is understood to be under God's ultimate sovereignty and may require his permission. The idea that humans can give consent or permission to evil also appears through warnings against yielding to temptation and aligning with sinful ways. Evil needs God's permission, and it must abide by God's laws. The notion that Satan and other evil forces must operate within boundaries set by God is most clearly demonstrated in the following passages. In Job 1:9 and through 1:12 and Job 2:4 through 2:6, the story shows Satan seeking and receiving God's permission to afflict the righteous man Job. God sets specific limits on what Satan can do, first by protecting Job's physical body and later his spiritual body. In Luke 22:31 through 32, Jesus tells Peter, "Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat." Here, asked or demanded, depending on the translation, implies that Satan required permission for his attack. Jesus' intercession for Peter's faith is what ultimately protects him, not his own strength. In 1 Kings 22:20 through 22, the Lord uses a lying spirit to deceive the prophets of King Ahab. God's directive to the spirit illustrates his ultimate authority over spiritual forces, even those with malicious intent. Several passages warn against giving in to the temptations of evil and aligning with those who practice wickedness. In Proverbs 1:10, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." This proverb directly advises against yielding to the persuasion of the wicked. In Romans 1:32, speaking of those who practice wickedness, the Apostle Paul writes, "Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give hearty approval to those who practice them." This passage describes how people can consent to or approve of evil and encourage it in others. In Ephesians 4:27, the Apostle Paul warns believers, "And give no opportunity to the devil." By sinning, people can open the door for Satan's influence in their lives. And in James 4:7, the commandment to resist the devil and he will flee from you implies that resisting the devil is an active choice. By not resisting, a person effectively gives way to temptation and evil influence. So now that we have some biblical and historical context about what these things might be, let's go back to see some more eyewitness accounts and see how the information provided aligns with the behavior of the children in these events. In Vermont, in the late 1990s, one of the earliest follow-up cases after Brian Bethel's account comes from rural Vermont. A middle-aged couple living in an isolated farmhouse. One winter night, during a violent snowstorm, they heard a knock at the front door. Opening it, they found two children, a boy and a girl, standing on the porch, without hats, gloves, or scarves. Their skin looked pale in the porch light. Their voices were strangely flat as they asked, "May we come in? Our parents will be here soon." The couple, unsettled but concerned, let them inside, offering blankets and hot drinks. The children sat stiffly, speaking in short, rehearsed phrases. They never removed their hoods. It's only when the wife poured cocoa that she noticed their eyes. Black. Completely black. At that moment, the family cats arched their backs, hissing violently. something they had never done before. The husband grew dizzy, lightheaded, and had to excuse himself to the bathroom. Concerned, the wife asked the children to leave. They stood up, and when the husband returned, the children were standing by the front door. They simply stated, "Our parents are here." The couple looked out the window, and they claimed to see a tall, thin man in a black suit standing motionless at the edge of the driveway. Without another word, the children walked outside and vanished with him into the storm. In the weeks following, the couple reported nosebleeds, migraines, and unusual fatigue. Whether these were medical coincidences or consequences of the encounter remains unknown. In the early 2000s, a late-night clerk in a small Oregon town described an encounter during the graveyard shift. Around 2 a.m., two boys stood at the station door. They looked about 13. They asked if he could give them a ride. Something about them felt wrong, though. He couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Then one boy tilted his head up from under the harsh fluorescent lights. His eyes were solid black. The clerk felt primal terror. Backing away, he muttered excuses. The children pressed harder. "We need a ride. You can help us." And then the boy leaned close to the door and whispered in a much sharper tone, "You have to let us in." The clerk hit the silent alarm, locking the station doors and summoning the police. By the time the officers arrived, the children were gone. Outside, rain had fallen steadily for hours, but no footprints were visible in the muddy parking lot. Around 2010, a traveling salesman, weary after a long drive, checked into a roadside hotel. Around 11 p.m., he heard knocking at the door. Opening the door, he found two children standing in the dim hallway. They asked, "Can we come in and use your phone?" Something about them felt strange, too still, and too formal. When the hallway light flickered, he saw their eyes, black voids reflecting nothing. Slamming the door, he locked it, and for 10 minutes they knocked, repeating in unison, "Please let us in. We can't come in unless you say it's okay." Eventually silence fell, and when he checked the peephole, the hallway was empty. And these reports aren't isolated. Similar accounts surface worldwide. In the British countryside, a man was waiting for a bus in the rain when he saw two silent children standing nearby. Their eyes reflected the dim streetlight as entirely black. When the headlights from approaching cars swept across them, they vanished. In the Australian outback, a family camping in a caravan reported being woken by soft knocking. Looking outside, they saw a small figure by the window. In the morning, they found small black handprints high on the glass, far above where a child's hand could reach. A retired sheriff in Appalachia tells of patrolling back roads when he saw a girl standing alone at night. When he slowed to ask if she was okay, his patrol dog growled and refused to leave the vehicle. The girl stood silently, eyes reflecting no light. She didn't respond, so he left. When he circled back moments later, she was gone. So now that you've heard a few stories about the BEKs, you may be asking yourself, why is there no hard evidence? You would think in this day and age that someone would have captured these creatures on their security camera. As stated in the account from the salesman, he tried to look at the security camera footage and found nothing. Another possibility is that a person who is experiencing this doesn't have a camera available, or they weren't expecting to need one. If you wake up in the middle of the night and someone's knocking at your door, the very first thing you pick up isn't a camera. All we have to rely on is someone's first, second, or even third-hand account. People's memories are fallible even at the best of times, and when you add a feeling of dread or terror, they may exaggerate key details to fill in why their experience affected them so much. One thing is certain, though, throughout all the stories, the people who have had experiences have seen something to cause them distress. It's there we have to meet them, because we don't share their experiences. So let's try to explain what might have happened and see how those theories hold out. Explanations range across a wide spectrum, from the strictly medical to the deeply supernatural. None of them fully satisfy explanation. Each offers a piece of the puzzle, but the whole picture remains elusive. Some argue that black-eyed kids can be explained by psychology, by sleep paralysis, mass suggestion, or cultural contagion. Others suggest biological or medical anomalies, eye conditions, hallucinations, even rare forms of disease. But then there are those who lean into the paranormal, spirits, demons, extraterrestrials, even interdimensional tricksters. Over the next section, let's walk through these possibilities one by one, starting with the most mundane and moving gradually into the most extraordinary. We'll ask, what do these explanations clarify, and what do they leave unresolved? And in the process, perhaps we'll get closer to answering the real question. When you open the door and find a child with black, soulless eyes staring back at you, what exactly are you looking at? Some researchers argue that reports of black-eyed kids could be the result of misperception under low light or of real medical conditions. One possible explanation is mydriasis, the extreme dilation of pupils. Mydriasis can occur naturally in very dark environments, but it can also be caused by drugs, head trauma, or neurological conditions. In low light, pupils expand to take in as much information as possible. If the iris is very black, the result can appear as the eye is nearly all black. Another possibility is aniridia, a rare congenital condition where the iris is either partially or completely absent. People with aniridia often appear to have very dark pupil-like eyes. Cases are rare, about 1 in 50,000 to 100,000 births, but they do exist. Drug use has also been proposed. Substances like LSD and MDMA or certain stimulants can dilate pupils dramatically, making them appear black under certain lighting. However, this would not explain why most witnesses describe the children's eyes as jet black even in well-lit environments, nor why these children appear so calm and rehearsed. There's also this unsettling case of Omaira Sanchez, a 13-year-old Colombian girl who was trapped in volcanic mud flow in 1985. As she was slowly dying, photos captured her eyes appearing completely black. This was likely caused by hypoxia and swelling, creating the appearance of a black sclera. The images shock the world, and they are haunting, and they demonstrate how human eyes can, under certain extreme conditions, appear black. But here's the problem. Mydriasis and similar conditions may explain isolated medical cases, but they don't explain the rest of the BEK pattern. The insistence on invitation, the overwhelming dread, the vanishing, the consistent behaviors across multiple reports. A medical condition may account for the black eyes, but it does not create an archetype. One of the first places we turn when faced with something bizarre is the human mind. Could the black-eyed kids be nothing more than tricks of perception, glitches in consciousness, or stories spread like a virus through culture? So, sleep paralysis may be one explanation. Sleep paralysis is a powerful candidate. In this state, the body is immobilized between sleep and wakefulness, while the mind remains alert. The result is often terrifying hallucinations, shadowy entities in the room, figures at the foot of the bed, visitors standing just outside the door. Witnesses describe an oppressive sense of dread so intense it feels like death itself is looming. The overlap with BEK encounters is striking. Helplessness, overwhelming fear, and the perception of an intruder. Then there's hypnagogic hallucinations, the vivid images and sounds that occur just as we slip into or out of sleep. You may have been jolted awake feeling like you were falling. That's hypnagogic hallucination. A knock at the door, a child's voice, a figure at the window. These are all well-documented experiences. If someone had already heard the black-eyed kid story, their brain might simply fill in the blanks, shaping the hallucination to match the legend. And finally, psychologists point to narrative contagion, the way stories spread and shape future perceptions. Just as UFO sightings spiked after flying saucers entered popular culture, BEK reports surged after Brian Bethel's story circulated online. Once an archetype was established, more people began to see it. We find this in the case of Slender Man, where a story became the reason for two 12-year-old girls to attempt to murder someone. They lured a classmate into the woods and reportedly stabbed that girl 19 times, saying that the Slender Man told them to do it. Luckily, the victim survived, but the story persists where a creepypasta came to life, at least in the psyches of these two young girls. But psychology has limits here. Sleep paralysis doesn't usually involve polite children knocking at your door. Hypnagogic hallucinations don't leave footprints. Pareidolia doesn't explain why animals react violently, and narrative contagion doesn't account for similar stories in cultures long before the 1990s. Psychology may explain how the story spreads, but it doesn't fully explain what began it. Here's where the explanations cross into the supernatural. In demonology, blackened eyes are often considered a sign of possession or spiritual oppression. Exorcists and clergy have reported that, in moments of manifestation, a subject's eyes may darken or roll back. Black eyes symbolize an absence of the soul, the window of the spirit covered, replaced by something else. The invitation rule fits perfectly into this framework. In Christian theology, demons cannot override free will. They must trick, deceive, or persuade their way in. They are bound by spiritual law. Countless BEK reports echo this principle with eerie precision. We can't come in unless you let us. Scripture itself supports this idea. In Matthew 12, Jesus describes the soul as a house that spirits may return to if left unguarded. In Job, Satan requires God's permission before afflicting Job. In Luke 8, demons beg Jesus for permission to enter a herd of swine. Over and over, consent is emphasized as spiritual law. What makes black-eyed kids especially insidious, then, is their disguise. By appearing as children, they exploit one of our deepest instincts, to protect and help the vulnerable. They weaponize compassion, turning kindness into the very doorway that allows them in. There's other interpretations as well. One is that the BEKs are extraterrestrial in nature. Reports of alien-human hybrids often describe beings who look almost human, but not quite. The skin is too pale, the movements are too stiff, and the eyes are just wrong. In UFO literature, the men in black are described in eerily similar terms. Monotone voices, mechanical speech, strange mannerisms, and the general sense of artificial humanity. Parallels to BEKs are uncanny. The flat rehearsed speech, the lifeless mannerisms, the eyes that betray their inhumanity. Add to this the reports of electrical interference, flickering lights, cameras failing, electronics glitching, and the UFO connection phenomenon is harder to ignore. Some encounters even occur in proximity to strange lights in the sky or reports of unidentified craft. Are black-eyed kids a form of alien hybrid, testing their ability to infiltrate human society? Are they part of a larger experiment, or are demons and aliens simply two cultural frameworks for the same entities, perceived differently depending on the lens of belief? John Keel, best known for his Mothman Prophecies book, proposed a radical idea that many paranormal entities are not extraterrestrial at all, but ultra-terrestrial. In his view, they exist in parallel dimensions, occasionally bleeding into ours. These entities adapt their appearance to fit cultural expectation. Fairies in one age, demons in another, aliens in the 20th century, and perhaps black-eyed children today. The BEKs, then, could be an example of these imperfect manifestations. They almost pass as a human, but the eyes give them away. They're close, but not exact. Then there's the concept of tulpas, or thought forms, beings created by a collective belief. The Philip experiment in 1970s Toronto is a famous example. A group invented a fictional ghost named Philip, and through seances they reported knocks, table movements, and even conversations with him. Though Philip never existed, the phenomena were real enough for the participants to experience them. Could the black-eyed kids be tulpas, manifestations fueled by the internet, by millions of people reading, fearing, and retelling the story? And if so, they are paradoxical, both real and unreal, created by human thought yet acting with independence. The more people believe, the more they appear. And finally, we arrive at the theory of psychic vampires, entities that feed not on blood but on energy. In folklore, many creatures sustain themselves on life force, emotions, or fear. The black-eyed kids certainly seem to inspire this kind of reaction. Witnesses often describe nausea, dizziness, headaches, or exhaustion after encounters. Animals are left agitated. Electronics malfunction, as stated before. The environment itself seems disturbed. If BEKs are energy predators, then their demand for permission is more than symbolic. To fully feed, they need consent. Allowing them inside, whether your home, your car, or perhaps even your awareness, creates a psychic bond that permits them to draw out your fear. The longer the encounter, the more potent the harvest. This overlaps neatly with the demonic interpretation. Both demons and psychic vampires are said to thrive on human weakness, fear, despair, sin, or suffering. Whether we call them jinn, vampires, demons, or black-eyed kids, the pattern is the same. A predator cloaked in innocence, thriving on vulnerability, waiting for us to open the door. Ultimately, I believe that we're dealing with something demonic, as that is what fits all the elements more neatly than any other explanation. As Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once wrote in Sherlock Holmes' novel The Sign of Four, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And the truths are the following. People had an interaction with something. They experienced dread and visceral fear. And some people have had lasting effects after the visitation. Why tell such a preposterous story and risk ridicule if you haven't had a horrifying encounter? They are experiencing real dread, and I believe they have seen what they claim to have seen. I don't think it's a demon masquerading as a child, but I believe there may be a temporary possession to gain entry into someone's house, to either gain spiritual entry or to do physical harm. That's the most insidious part to me, that these beings want to use our compassion, empathy, and our strongest emotions of protection and care against us. Perhaps the best course of action is to rely on those things that served us best throughout our human experience, our instincts. If your gut's telling you something's wrong, follow that instinct. As a parent, I would want my children to find safety out in the night, but I would also be horrified if someone let them inside if they asked. I don't trust people to do the right thing, so here's what I would do if they showed up to my house. If they want to call their parents, ask for the number so you can call for them. If it's night, turn on the porch light so you can clearly see the children. Refuse entry at all costs. This puts you at risk, spiritually, physically, and legally. If they won't give you the parent's number, call the police. Let's hope this never takes place. That would be a terrifying experience to endure. That's tonight's journey into the strange on Arcane Station. If you've ever had an encounter with a black-eyed kid or any other brush with any high strangeness, I want to hear from you. Share your story with me. Email me at mike@arcane-station.com or message me directly on Instagram at Arcane Station 2. Your experiences might even be featured in a future episode. And if you enjoyed tonight's episode, do me a favor. Hit the follow button, leave a review, and share this show with a friend who loves the unexplained. It's the easiest way to help us grow and keep exploring the mysteries together. I'm very close to finalizing the channel on Discord, where listeners will be able to swap stories, theories, and go down late-night rabbit holes. If you want to be part of that conversation, soon I will be providing a link in the episode notes, or you can visit arcane-station.com. So, send in your stories, join the discussion, and let's keep building this strange little corner of the world together. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and keep your eyes open.